everybody, Darren Hall here today to give you a previously announced Wisdom Warrior chat today on the power of prayer as I give my 528 alchemy crystal bowl a little tap to draw you in. So I'm holding my phone a little further away from me today, and we've got some ocean, we've got some iguanas chasing around, some chickens, maybe a wild horse might come around. So just let me know if it's too quiet, because I can hold it closer to my face. So if the sound is good, let me know and I'll just carry on. I'm very excited today because this is a subject that I'm really passionate about, and I think it's very important to discuss this subject, especially with everything that's going on in our world with the coronavirus, the slowdown to a halt basically of our economy in some ways, and a lot of just the shakes that people are experiencing in their reality that can be quite panic-inducing. As you probably know, if you've been tuning into these chats I've been doing multiple times a week, I decided to seek refuge in Costa Rica, or rather not seek, rather stay in refuge in Costa Rica, because I was already here on my annual winter trip, running retreats and playing festivals and doing lots of other good stuff. And I had pretty much decided to make Costa Rica my new home. And when this coronavirus thing hit, I decided, you know what, I'm going to stay here. And some people have been giving me a bit of a hard time on social media for that. And I understand that being back in Western cities like Toronto and such, there's a really awful situation going on there, and my prayers go out to everyone who's entangled in all of that. But you know, being in Costa Rica, as much as it's nice, we have a beach right in front of us, the ocean, tons of sunlight, which of course is antiviral and very healing on many, many levels. You know, we don't know what the security is going to be like here moving forward. We don't know how long this pandemic is going to go out. So I think everyone's in their own situation. I might be taking a sip every now and again from my spirulina soup. I'm on the final day of a cleanse. Today we decided to do a week cleanse, those of us who are gathered here in this space together, real beautiful spiritual community, to purify ourselves. And I highly recommend that to anyone at this moment. We're dealing with a lot of noxious energies with this coronavirus and such, but on the whole, living in any kind of industrial city, you're dealing with so much pollution and radiation from cell phone use and Wi-Fi and such. It's always important to maximize your health and your wellness with supplementation and eating lots of whole foods and doing at least a cleanse once a year. And I also adhere to fasting. I try and fast at least once a month, just a water fast for 24 hours, sometimes longer. That's a very good thing to do as well. So anyhow, let's jump into it, because I have a lot to say on this subject, and I love my hair is like total going into Afro today. We've had a bit of like a spa retreat as we were doing this cleanse, and we did these hair cleansing things yesterday. We put a bunch of goop in our hair and left it overnight. It was kind of fun, and then you know, we washed it off a couple times, and it still kind of smells like dog pee, but I think it's good for me. It's a good look. I look more like a Viking, which is nice. But let's get into this. The power of prayer, and why I'm bringing this out right now is, well, in lieu of the global meditation that happened over the weekend, because I think that was an incredibly powerful experience for a lot of people. It made us realize that when we tap in together, there's a vibration that gets created that does have a global effect. They've done lots of studies now on the ionosphere, of the different layers of the atmosphere, and how literally those layers get charged by human consciousness itself. And I think moving forward, as we continue to awaken as a species into spirituality, and we start to make these shifts into what I believe in many of the great prophetic systems have said, you know, we're moving into an age that is potentially a golden age, where spirituality and science will start to confirm each other. And I love this because I'm both into science, but I'm also into spirituality, and their convergence is one of the things that excites me the most. And I think we're going to be increasingly leaning into a time where science is going to be humbled to discover that the mysticisms of spirituality have been precisely accurate in a lot of the ways they've been contextualizing our world and speaking about things in our world. And just last year, I remember sharing a bunch of articles by very erudite science magazines where they stated that the hippies were right was the headline. And there was two that I shared. One of them was the hippies were right, everything is conscious. I think the other one was like the hippies were right, everything is connected. And what I found both laudable about that's great that scientists are finally being humble enough to admit that they've been in a bit of a myopia, narrow-sightedness around some things, particularly in being overly materialistic and positivist, which means only what I see is what I believe is true, what I can observe. Whereas spiritualists and mystics would rather say, well, the five senses are limited. There are extra suprasensory senses that can be actually tapped into, potentiated, and activated, and there's whole other subtle energetic worlds that can be observed, but that can only be done through spiritual disciplines, to be disciple of practices which harness that energy. It's almost like the human being is kind of like a Rubik's Cube, and when you put it together in the right way, it unlocks full-colored spectrum dimensions of powers. The yogis call this the siddhas. And a lot of the mystics, like I recently read a book about Chinese medicine, because I actually trained in Chinese medicine for 4 years. Oh, that spirulina soup is thick. And when we're at school, one of the things that we used to talk about was like, wow, how did they figure out that there were all these like 12 meridians in the body, but on top of that there's 8 extraordinary meridians, and there's all kinds of like little channels. How did they figure this all out? And some of the great Chinese practitioners actually believe that it was because there was a time where literally you could view this, that using the third eye, the psychic center of the pineal gland, which is actually shaped like an eye within the brain, they could view these higher realms and see these things. So when I posted, oh, the hippies were right, the whole universe is consciousness, I also tagged or additionally commented, well, if the hippies were right about that, what else were they right about? Because seriously, these things have been talked about for thousands of years, and not just talked about, but there's been another kind of science about these things, because science is literally any discipline where there is a discipline, or any field of study where there's a disciplined study of a phenomena, and you come to some sort of conclusion about that. What we have today is an empirical science which is based on what I see is what I believe, and moreover, it's quantitative. So it doesn't really get to results unless there's a numerical value to this. And while that is great on one hand, qualitative science is more what mysticism is based on, which is more based on qualities. Being able to see things that necessarily don't present themselves as numbers, but as maybe symbols, as images. This is something that happens in Chinese medicine when we look at pulse diagnosis. When we read the pulse in Chinese medicine, we're not looking for a BPM. This is things I went over to in the last Wisdom Warrior talk. What I want to also get into is prayer has also been studied scientifically now. And they have shown that prayer has an absolutely instantaneously effect over long distances of people. There's been studies that have done where they've had Tibetan monks, for instance, who have some of the highest meditative capabilities on the planet. When they studied Tibetan monks meditating, that was when they actually discovered that we actually have a whole other realm of brainwaves that we can actually emanate called gamma rays, which are very, very, very high frequencies. Typically, people are in a beta brainwave state, which is like the monkey mind. And then when we get into light meditation, we go down to alpha. And then we go down to theta, where we achieve visions. And then we go down to delta, which is where we achieve deep sleep. And they found when Tibetan monks were meditating, they would go through these stages, but then it was like the delta was like a trampoline. And they would all of a sudden hit delta and then soar up into gamma, which is 100 hertz a second or I believe 33 to 100 hertz a second. Very high frequency brainwaves. And these are achieved, actually, now we found through more brainwave studies, through flow states, through athletes when they're in that like prime moment of performing at their most excellent and they're just surrendered to the moment. But they discovered this in Tibetan monks for the first time, I believe. And they did studies with Tibetan monks where they would have them in Tibet with pictures of people who had illnesses such as cancer. And they would actually ask these Tibetan monks each day to send them prayers at a certain time. And then back in California, where they had these patients in a hospital hooked up to all kinds of medical devices that can read immunofunctionality, brainwave scans, heart rate coherence, they found that the moment these Tibetan monks started to pray, the exact precise moment, the patients who were cancer stricken in California started to heal instantaneously. That's why I like to say time and space is so 20th century. In the 21st century, we've realized the non-locality of reality, which is what quantum physics is all about. How that really this proves that we are so connected on such a deep level that the minute we send out a very powerful thought form, which is what prayer is, it can have immediate results. That's profound. And they've done studies like that dozens and dozens of times now. So to me, this stuff should be taught to every human being. It should be taught to children for us to harness these latent powers that we have at our disposal to affect our reality in a very positive way. And also in a negative way, because consciousness and the ethers that we all live in, the ether, this is another thing that needs to be totally understood. Science has finally leaned into this. As science, Western modern science, breaks out of its modern cage of materialism, it's starting to realize the sublimeness of energy, of how we live in the background or held in a womb-like space of energy, which is called, in the yoga traditions, akasha. And akasha is said to be the mother of the four elements. It's what gives birth to material reality. And akasha, according to the great Vedic rishis, the seers of the great ancient Indian cultures, also said akasha has many qualities. One of the qualities is its shining light. All-pervading light is actually one of the translations of akasha. And akasha also can hold thoughts. Thoughts actually travel through this energetic form, this energetic space, this ether. And thoughts actually don't ever die. They can actually stay in the akasha for eternity, according to these ancient ancestors of ours. And they call this the Akashic Library, and which is why when we meditate, even when we intentionally pray, we can actually take, as if you will, taking out books from this energetic reality of all the collective consciousness ever existed. That's why people can experience downloads and insights almost spontaneously when they're in these like really powerful states of meditation. Or anytime anyone's in a flow state, a gamma wave state, you can have these like downloads that happen just like that, because literally the human materialistic internet is just a microcosm of this more macrocosmic internet that is mystical, that is spiritual, that all the shamans, all the spiritual mystics, all the masters have known about and have used. They called it Indra's web as well in the yogic teachings. Now, why prayer is important right now is because we are witnessing, I believe, with this coronavirus, the turning of ages that so many prophets, even activists like Joanna Macy have said would happen at some point. The Mayans were very specific. In fact, they said in 2012 it would be the beginning of a shift into the ninth wave of galactic consciousness. The book of Revelations talks about this time of the apocalypse. Interestingly enough, the apocalypse truly means the time of great revealing, but the church fathers distorted the word to mean the end of the world, I think in about the 16th century, so 400 years ago or so, which I find ironic because in a lot of ways it is the end of the world for a lot of these monolithic structures that have been ruling us with false belief systems for so long and persecuting more of the mystical aspects of our culture. So, prayer, to me, is very relevant in what's happening right now because we are shifting into a new age, an Aquarian age, where energy is going to be more our focus of how to go about our life, working with energy, subtle energy, which is already happening. I love that people say things like, I love your vibe, I love your vibe, I resonate with you. These are energetic terms. And as we make this shift, we're also going to start to realize that we are all connected, and that the individualism that we've been bludgeoned with in Western civilization is a lie, is an absolute falsehood. Let me reverse. Not an absolute falsehood, but a partial falsehood. Because on one level, yes, we do have an individualistic ego, which is important for us to mobilize our sense of self in this dimension, this third dimension. But in higher dimensionality, which we're connected to, we have aspects of us that are completely part of a one unified energy. And you can enter into those states in meditation, in dance, and making music. Music making is one of my favorite ways to enter into unified states, what I call practicing oneness. When you jam together with a bunch of musicians and you phase into that coherence of symphonic sound, you literally feel like you are one breathing, living, vibrational entity. And that's why music has always been considered sacred. And Saint Augustine said, to sing is to pray twice, which is something I'll come back to because that's very important in our prayer work. But why this is important right now is because as we make this shift, I believe as we continue to tread into this future time, consciousness, particularly human consciousness and the greater consciousness that we're literally immersed in as the universe, is going to be one of the great revelations and one of the great inquiries that we're going to start to make with our sciences. It's already started with the noetic sciences. I believe it's going to become more and more powerful. And I believe one of the reasons that we've been so slow to this is because if you study science and the history of science, you realize that science has been really co-opted by corporate political powers. That's why the quantum physics revolution, which actually started in the beginning of the 20th century, has taken so long to actually fully be expressed in our culture. And it's a friggin' crime against humanity. I'm going to say it. It's a crime against humanity that children are still taught Newtonian physics in school. And this is why kids are so fucking bored. We like to blame it on ADD and such like that. I do believe there's chemical imbalances that can happen in some of those syndromes. But I think really kids are just fucking bored. They're bored. They know better. They're not intelligible enough to express it, but they know that the stuff they're being fed has no functionality for them in reality. So why would they learn something? Why would they run a computer for their scholastic career on Windows 95 in 2020? It's lunacy. But of course, there's so many control mechanisms in our society that we're becoming aware to, that we're breaking the shackles of. And one of those is going to be unleashing this expansive power of human consciousness, because the last 2,000 years has really been a tale of our unconsciousness. And it's a horrible tale to see what happens to human beings when they act largely unconscious, and when they're really suppressed and oppressed from using their full expansive consciousness. That's why I love reading ancient scriptures and spiritual scriptures like the Gnostics, the Nag Hammadi Library, which is like one of my faves, because they talk so much in depth about the original blessing that humanity is, about our innate genius, about how every human being, if they were educated and cultivated and potentiated in the right way, would be such a luminous, shining, sagacious sight, sagacious being. And of course, we don't have that. We're conditioned rather to be in a state of ignorance and rather inanity and ill health on so many dimensions, and that's really a travesty. So what I want to share is the power of prayer is very important right now. As we saw with this global meditation, where I've seen so many people share like incredible experiences they had, whether they were just visions on the inner landscape to people feeling content and vibrating love and healing for days. We need to be doing this much more often, which is why tomorrow I'm going to start running these prayer waves, thanks to a friend who she shares on her YouTube channel, prayer waves every day, and I'm going to hook into that. She's really inspired other people to launch their own prayer waves every day at 11 a.m. here in Costa Rican time. So for those of my friends who are in Toronto, you're 2 hours later, so that'd be 1 p.m. I'm going to guide a prayer each day, very short, very brief, with a crystal bowl or bowls, where we're just going to connect into our heart space. We're going to unleash prayers together. And particularly, I'm going to really specify that these prayers really connect to Mother Earth, because I believe now more than ever, that's what we need to harness. We need to harness love and prayers to the earth. The power of prayer, how to pray, what is it all about? Well, there's so many ways to pray. So I don't want to bring any kind of rigid dogma to it, but it's pretty much as simple as just closing one eyes and just speaking to a higher sense of yourself or a higher sense of creation that may have created us and the whole universe. Some form of divinity, if you will. And you can use whatever label you feel comfortable with. Creator, Great Mystery, or the indigenous of Turtle Island First Nations, God, the Christians, Allah, the Muslims, Jehovah, the Jews. So many other folk traditions have their own calls. Whatever you feel comfortable with. I'm going to use my own in these prayers to connect to Gaia, who is the goddess that is Earth according to the ancient Greek tradition. Also Sophia, which is the name that was given to her by the ancient Gnostics. This is a spicy soup. So the idea right there that's beautiful about prayer, if you will, I'll use this analogy because I love it. It's being used in a lot of archetypal psychology. Have you ever seen images of planes being refueled in the air? You know, during the Cold War, they had bombers that were flying 24 hours a day around the world with nuclear bombs in them, and they would be refueled by these bigger planes that were like carrying all this oil or this gas, and there would be this long, thin metal rod that they'd have to specifically hook into to be refueled. When we pray, we are that small plane hooking into something bigger to be refueled. This is what it's all about. It's also very healing to give oneself, to surrender oneself, to open oneself to something that is higher than you, that's something that may have created you, in fact, that is something perhaps of a supreme intelligence, omnipotent, eminent, immanent. These types of things help to diminish our very hardened and often inflated egotism that we are conditioned with in Western culture. We are all conditioned to be narcissists on a certain level. Some of us, of course, will play it out much more highly than others, but for the most part, we're all conditioned to have egos that are in dominance of our state of being. Whereas those who live a spiritual life, their ego more or less becomes a planet that is orbiting around this great sun, this great central radiance that is their sense of higher order, the divinity, creator, all creation itself. So prayer is very healing on that level, in the sense it helps you diminish your ego, helps you be more humble. It also allows you to be in a direct link with this greater form of intelligence for help and support. And we all need that help and support. And I can't tell you how many of the great spiritual teachers I've had the beauty and honor to be a student of in my life have shared that prayer is one of the most important things. It is one of the cornerstones of living a spiritual life, specifically because we need that support. We cannot do this alone, people. I want to say that again. We cannot do this alone. Especially right now, where we're dealing with perhaps one of the most devastating collective adversities that we've ever faced in our lifetime and lifetimes. We need the rapport. We need to tag in and bring the divinity into our lives, baby. And one of the great First Nations teachers I worked with, this Mohawk elder, she used to share that anytime you're trying to break an addictive pattern in your life, you can't break that addictive pattern unless you bring Creator into your life to help you. That's how important it is. And it's not to portray us as something weak and something trivial and insignificant, and oh, why do we need this like greater power? No, it's a revelation of celebration and joy to relate to this greater power and realize that to be truly human means that you are in continuum, you are in symbiosis with all of this. And the falsehood has been this separation identity that we are islands unto ourselves. We're supposed to exist in this very malleable dualistic, but I'd say it's more than dualistic, it's multi-dimensional scape of awareness, where on one dimension, we know I am Darren, this is me, this is my ego, but on higher dimensions, I know I am a part of this earth. I have a consciousness that can entrain with these trees and feel into the trees, into the animals, into everything in the universe. We are one. This is what all the great spiritual traditions have said. And prayer is a great way to practice that sense of oneness. And practicing oneness is super, super important. So prayer is good for diminishing one's ego, getting one in touch with a higher sense of self and a higher sense of the universe. And it also gets us in touch with that support from those higher divine realms. The other thing I'm going to add, the fourth thing, is that prayer can enact miracles. Yep, I know, miracles sounds like some kind of new agey blah blah, but truly miracles happen. All spiritual traditions, if you've studied them, there are all cases in a plethora of detail of miracles happening, spontaneous events that defy any rationalism. They just happen. A person's disease goes away in an instant. Miracles happen, and often those miracles precede prayer. So right now we need to be really working in the realm of miracles, to be praying for this, but we also want to be precise about our prayers and intentional about our prayers as well. So my advice to you is to start praying every single day, because a lot of people have said that we only pray when we need it, right? And that's unfortunate. You know, we wait for something like the coronavirus to get on our knees and weep in mercy to something higher, where we were total agnostic previous, or what's the word I'm looking for? Didn't even believe in God at all, or the divinity. And they always say that. The irony is that on our deathbed we all become believers, right? But we want to be opportunistic. We don't want to be waiting always for that moment where we're in crisis to be praying. And I know that I need that advice as well. You know, I do pray on the daily, but I often feel I should be praying more. Like the Essenes, who used to pray 3 times a day. But we should be praying on the daily, because when you start to work this relationship with the divine, this higher intelligence, you start to cultivate something. And you will start to feel something, a kind of merit, a kind of virtue in your life that's kind of always there. It's like this piece of invisible gold, or some like sacred invisible crystal or light that starts to suffuse your aura little by little, more and more and more and more and more each day, until you become completely robust with this energy. And then perhaps you can start to do really miraculous works, like some of the siddhas or superpowers that the ancient yogis were exhibiting. But this is truly remarkable stuff, and I want you to start doing it. And then when we do these Facebook Live prayer waves every day, on my professional Facebook page, Darren Austin Hall, Spiritual Educator, Sound Healer, I think it is called, that's where these 11 a.m. prayer waves are going to happen every day for Gaia, for the Earth. I want people to share comments, you know, start talking about things. I'm going to be soon making a Gaia Awakening page, where we'll be talking more about the phenomena of the awakening of the Earth and the symbiotic awakening of humanity. But I want people to share their experiences, because people often have phenomena that happen, metaphysical, superphysical things happen when they pray, and that can be really, really beautiful. And I believe this is really critical right now, because I believe one of the mysteries of consciousness is this whole idea of critical mass, where they've studied things like the minds of monkeys. They've introduced a new tool to a select few amount of monkeys, and they find when they reach a certain critical mass, which I believe is about somewhere between 18 and 23%, when that amount of the monkeys figure out this tool, it's just this magical phenomenon of consciousness, where all of a sudden all the monkeys all over a continent even start to pick up that tool. Rupert Sheldrake, the great scientist, leans into this with this idea of morphogenetic fields to explain through field phenomena how we're all interlaced and interconnected on a consciousness level. Increasingly, this is going to become clear to humans. I think a lot of humans are already understanding this, and this is such a joyous thing to study, because there's so much to do, and it starts to re-enchant your life. If you realize that every thought that you're thinking in a conscious way has an effect, my gosh, your whole day could be filled with sending out prayers, with meditating, with entraining to different phenomena of nature, and seeing what a tree really feels like, or seeing what the sun feels like. This is super fun. This is Hogwarts being real, people. This is what life is going to be all about for all of us, I hope. And now we can actually get together and harness the power of prayer to send waves of healing and love throughout the world. And I think we're going to start seeing remarkable things. And I think science is eventually going to catch up, as it always does. It's always a step behind Western science. Always a step behind. It's so arrogant. I know, I love you, science, but man, wake up and admit there's things you don't know. And there's things that have been known by the great indigenous peoples, the mystics, the spiritual masters. And it's time. It's time to give them the credence that they deserve, the reverence that they deserve. Yeah, the hippies were right, but they've been right about a lot of things for a long time, because those hippies were also all of those incredible beings that I just mentioned. And it's time to make space. And if you aren't going to make space, we're going to make the space. And it's time to assert the spiritual reality of this great world that we live in, this great universe that we live in, this spiritual science as well, that makes up this universal sense of truth that all great cultures have known and have celebrated and revered. And the power of prayer is one of those cornerstones. So I'm going to leave that talk there, but I'm going to guide us into a quick little prayer right now. I'm just going to show you a few of the tools that I use, because if you really want to get into a good prayer space, I believe you have to create what psychologists would call liminal space, but what more of a shamanic practitioner would call a ritual space. This is creating an atmosphere where you are in touch with the sacred. The sacred is what is the greater power than us. It comes from the Indo-European word sak, which means greater than power. So I like to use, first of all, a smudge. It is a little beautiful breezy day here in Costa Rica, so I don't know if I'm going to really be able to get this thing lit. Seems to be working. So you can use this Palo Santo stick or sage. And something else the scientists have caught onto, burning smudges actually is antimicrobial. They figured that one out too. So very important to be burning these. So give your whole body a nice bathe with some kind of cleansing smudge, and then light a candle. I learned from my studies in Hermetic magic that lighting of an alive flame always connects a conduit to the divine. And then, of course, I just love essential oils. You know, if you have frankincense, boom, that is the oil of prayer. I just bought some Lang Lang, which is one of my faves. Lang Lang is also quasi-sensuous and gets you into that aphrodisiac flavor if you're more into the tantric prayers. And then I have an assortment of instruments I like to use, tinctures and such. Now, when you pray, there's so many different ways to pray, but the most basic thing is you are basically appealing to a higher consciousness, a force that is greater than yourself. Call it the divine, call it source, call it the great mystery. You are appealing, you are asking for help, but you're also sharing gratitude. You can also send prayers to things and other people when you've harnessed to these greater powers. And one of the things that I've learned about in prayer, through studying prayer, and I can't remember who said this, a great spiritual writer, but I think it was Teilhard de Chardin. He may have said this, that when you pray, make it passionate. Get your feelings involved. Don't be afraid to be emotional. A Mohawk elder shared with me that when you pray, lay all your vulnerabilities out. Everything that you are. Don't hold anything back. This is your creator, your maker that you're appealing to, your mother, father, divine. Be totally naked to them. Don't hide things back in shame. These forces are filled with infinite levels of unconditional love. Share everything. I really, really invite you to get in that space. Something truly powerful happens. Speak out loud. Let yourself be heard. If you can, if you're in a space that you can do that. You can do it internally too, just as powerful. And just allow it to become a process that takes its own life each and every time. It can be different each and every time. The basic thing is every day you're cultivating this relationship with these higher realms, with the divine. So I like to start out with some sound. The Tibetan tingsas are beautiful because they create a binaural beat, which entrains the left and the right hemisphere of the brain to come into coherence. Helps to focus our consciousness so we can be more intentional. And I don't always do this, but I often like to pray with a bowl, toning. So yes, I'll tone a bowl while it's happening. So if you are of the heart and the mind to carry forward with me in this quick prayer, I invite you now to just close your eyes and just find that beautiful breath of life. And we'll start entering into this attitude of reverence by acknowledging that this breath moving in and out of our body has been proclaimed by the mystics to be the breath of spirit, even the breath of the earth itself. We are literally suckling to the breast of the earth with every breath. She is nourishing us with that vitality, which we have called oxygen, what the ancients called spirit. Honoring that element of spirit, that element of air, moving into your body, bringing you into presence. Start to feel your body with your awareness, moving the head into the heart even. Start to imagine that your heart is this magnanimous light, this star of brilliant radiance shining in the center of your chest with unlimited powers of love, healing. And as we connect to our deeper soul consciousness, this is where then we are able to start our prayer. Oh, Mother Earth, oh Gaia, as the ancients have called you, the goddess that is this planetary Earth. I reach out to you to connect to you. I entreat you to respond, to be in connection and rapport with me on this beautiful day. I love you so much. I have so much gratitude for you. I thank you so much for the foods that you nourish me with every day. The air, the waters, the minerals, all the elementals that make up your world. I honor and adore the indigenous who have kept in steady rapport with your laws and your eco-spiritual ways. I send you love, Mother Earth. Let us all send Mother Earth love. Send her our gratitude, imagining light emanating from our heart, shining all about, sending it into the earth. And in kind, perhaps you start to feel that beneficent love returning to you from the earth itself. As you breathe in, and that love from Mother Earth returns into your heart, filling you, steeping you in this glory of love, this love of love. Mother Earth, I send you prayers. I send you prayers of healing. We hear you. We hear that perhaps one of the dimensions of this virus is to make us stop this way that we have been living in absolute opposition of your ways and your laws. We acknowledge that we have been brought into a sacred pause to take stock of our beliefs, of our world systems, and to start to reset them, rebirth them into new octaves of expression so we can live in peace and harmony with you and realize that paradise has never been lost, but it is found here in the beauty of your infinitudes of landscape and ecology and metaphysical love and life forms. We love you, Mother Earth. We hear you. Please let us be known what lessons we need to learn in this moment. Please let us know how to navigate the adversity of this virus. Please let the suffering end. but only when you deem it to be necessary for it to end. For I personally acknowledge that we perhaps need more time to learn from this adversity, so that when things go back to some sort of stability, they can go back to not the ordinary, but something new and extraordinary. A new civilization that honors you first, where we are all earth, our Gaian. I send out rays of prayerful intent to all the great ones, the great masters, the great elders, and all of our lineages, to be with us, wisdom to help guide us through this very, very trepidatious time, so we may be in their company during our daily lives and be connected with that invisible world of spirit, so much so that we never, never, ever again doubt its tangible existence. And I pray to Creator, the greatest of greats, the great mystery, thanking Him, thanking it for life. May we be so blessed. May we receive the blessings. As Saint Augustine has taught me, to sing is to pray twice. So I always end. I send this song out to the earth. I'm just going to release 3 Om chants, actually, if you want to chant with me. Let's breathe in. To the earth. To the earth and all creation. Take a minute to sit in silence, to feel the effects, maybe even feel a response. Yay! We did it. We prayed together. So let this be the catalyst for you. Start praying every day, multiple times a day. Bring people together in your house, your household, and pray together. Set up your own prayer wave nexuses. You can pray in group and collective. I'll be praying here every day, on my Facebook professional page, which I'll link. 11:11 a.m. Costa Rican time. Be sending out prayers every day. Join me. And soon I'll be launching as well some more global prayer initiatives where we can come together with the sounds, the healing sounds of crystal bowls even, and praying together. So much more to share. I'll just share lastly as well that for one of my last albums, Mystical Meditations, a series of 7 guided meditations, there are some really profound ones there, especially the third one, which is a shamanic journeying meditation to connect with the earth. I think that's very vital right now because Gaia, the earth, is awakening. The fulfillment of the Gnostic prophecies is coming true, I believe. And I know a lot of other people, through their prayers to the earth and their meditation connections with the earth, have been feeling that as well. And I think that's really such a blessing and another harbinger of the halcyon days which are ahead of us, even though right now we're in some dire straits. But just know we're in the dissolution period where things are just collapsing so that new forms can be created. Make sure you take care of each other though. Collapses are real. People who are underprivileged are definitely feeling it more so than us that have certain kinds of financial and economic abundance. So make sure you're as well spreading your prayer net, not only through prayer, but through action, reaching out to your community, seeing who needs help. If you have abundance, help them out. This is our time to really show the power of love and how we needn't fear anything when we just love each other rightly and love each other profusely. Soul power all the way, people. Love you all the glory, all the love to you. Darren Austin Hall coming to you from Costa Rica, the land of Pura Vida. Be glorious.